You are familiar, I think, with the incident that occurred back about a month ago on April 11th, 2018 at the Log Cabin restaurant, which resulted in the death of Keith Kent. That night at the Log Cabin, the Genesee County Sheriff, William Sharon, made a decision to get the state police involved and turn the investigation over to them because of the fact that Mr. Kent was shot by a deputy sheriff. The New York State Police conducted a very thorough investigation, which was just completed earlier this week. They interviewed basically everyone possible, everyone who was at the Log Cabin that night. They did a great deal of work on this case involving a lot of current technology as far as examination of the scene and so on. And they did it in a very workmanlike and a very prompt manner. And we are very grateful to them for stepping in and taking on this investigation. They reported to us on that investigation, and based thereon, this matter was presented to the Genesee County Grand Jury yesterday, and the Grand Jury was asked to vote on the issue of justification under Article 35 of the Penal Law of New York State. And based on the presentation that was made to them, the Genesee County Grand Jury voted yesterday to return a no bill, finding that the actions of the deputy sheriff were justified and that there was no cause for any criminal charges in this matter. That was filed earlier today with the court, and that brings the matter to a conclusion. I will now have Ms. Cianfrini speak to you about a little bit more about the details of this case. Ms. Cianfrini was at the scene that night when this occurred, and she has worked a great deal on this case and spent a great deal of time working through the investigation with the state police, and a great deal of time preparing this matter for presentation to the grand jury. And she's very familiar with the facts of this case, and so she'll tell you a little bit more about what we learned from the state police investigation, including specifically what we learned from interviews of all the people who were present that night. So I'll let her speak to that, and then we'll take questions.
Good afternoon. What I'm going to share with you this afternoon is what was learned from the investigation. We are not permitted to talk to you about what was done within grand jury, so anything that I am sharing with you today is as a result of the investigation. On April 11th, 2018, the Genesee County Sheriff's Office dispatch received a 911 call from an individual inside the Indian Falls Log Cabin restaurant reporting a disturbance within the restaurant. Sheriff's deputies were dispatched to the restaurant. While en route, the Genesee County Sheriff's Office dispatch received what would be characterized as several updates indicating that this incident at the Log Cabin was quickly escalating. Specifically, the 911 caller advised dispatch that Mr. Kent had fired 2 shots in the parking lot. As a result of that, patrons at the restaurant and employees went down into a basement and began to arm themselves with materials in the basement while hiding. Mr. Kent did re-enter the restaurant and threats were made. Upon arriving at the scene, the Genesee County Sheriff's deputies encountered Mr. Kent in the parking lot. And prior to encountering him, they heard a shot being fired. When they located Mr. Kent in that parking lot, he was holding a revolver in his hand. He was given multiple directives by sheriff's deputies to drop his weapon. He did not comply with those directives. He began to advance in the direction of Deputy Young, raising and ultimately pointing his revolver at Deputy Young. Deputy Young fired several rounds, and Mr. Kent was shot. Sheriff's deputies then secured Mr. Kent, as they're required to do in this situation, and determined whether and to what extent any medical attention was needed. After doing that, they then went into the bar area and located the patrons and the employees in the basement. These witnesses told the New York State Police that they were in fear for their lives that night, and one witness even credited the Genesee County Sheriff's Office with saving his life that night. As Mr. Friedman said, shortly after this incident, and after I was called onto the scene, Genesee County Sheriff William Sharon did request that the New York State Police step in and take over investigation of this matter, and the scene was turned over to the state police at that point in time. They worked numerous hours in analyzing all the evidence, the scene, collecting interviews from witnesses, and it just was a great team that were dedicated to reviewing this matter. And as you learned, the grand jury today did return a no bill for no charges to be filed against Deputy Ryan Young, and that his actions were justified. Thank you.
Melissa, you mentioned that Deputy Young fired several rounds at the suspect. Do you know how many and how many struck the suspect?
Yes, approximately 15 rounds were discharged. One struck Mr. Kent in the neck, and the other one struck him across his back, although I would call that more of a superficial wound, the one across the back.
Can you say if Mr. Kent was consuming drugs or alcohol the night of the incident?
I cannot say whether he was consuming drugs. He at least had been consuming some alcohol at the log cabin.
Has the toxicology been completed?
Not to my knowledge.
Is there any, what do we know that precipitated him, Mr. Kent, becoming upset?
I don't think we can answer that. I mean, I don't think we know the answer to that.
Did witnesses say anything that he said prior to that? Was there a confrontation in there? Or did the witnesses give any indication of what led up to events?
Yes. He was talking with a woman at the bar, and she was not receptive, I guess you might say, to what he was saying to her, and he was asked to leave her alone, and ultimately was asked to leave the bar and was removed from the bar under protest.
Can you go into how long Deputy Young was on the force, a little bit about his background and whether or not he's back at work?
If memory serves, I believe Deputy Young has been a member of the Genesee County Sheriff's Office for 2 years, and prior to that was a member of the Leroy Police Department for 4 years. He has returned to work, which I believe up until this point has been what is known as light duty.
Melissa, what type of weapon did the deputy use?
An AR-15 rifle. His service rifle, which is an AR-15.
15 rounds, would that empty a magazine?
No, it would not.
And Mr. Kent was struck once in the chest, you said?
In the neck.
In the neck, okay.
Melissa, we were told earlier that there may be, that there is, footage of this, what do you call it?
Body-worn camera footage.
Body cam, thank you.
Yes.
A, is that true, and B, is that false?
Body-worn camera footage was secured in this incident. What I can tell you about the body-worn camera footage is that this incident took place in a dark, during the night it was dark, there was limited lighting, and that there were no body-worn camera recordings that directly caught the incident.
So it was no help to the investigation?
I wouldn't say that, no, I think it was, but I think what Ms. Cianfrini is indicating is you don't see the shooting clearly occurring.
Do you hear anything?
Oh, yes.
Is that footage releasable?
Well, that is something you'd have to take up with the state police.
Is it their call to make?
Yes.
What type of weapon did Mr. Kent have? Was it registered? Did he have any kind of permit to have it
He was a valid permit holder, and it was a revolver. I think it was a .357, if I remember correctly. I'm sorry, it was a revolver.
Do we know how many shots he fired?
3.
And do we know what he hit?
I know that 2 were discharged in the air. I cannot tell you where the third one, where that was being
No
directed.
bullet holes found in the building or anything like that?
Not with respect to Mr. Kent's firearm.
There were 3 shots fired, so there were 2 outside, but the third one, we don't know if it was inside or outside, or that was outside.
We have reason to believe it was outside, but I can't confirm that for sure.
Do we know if police had ever had any prior contact with Mr. Kent?
I wouldn't know that.
Did Mr. Kent make any statements once police were on scene? Did he say anything to the police officers? Did he respond verbally in any way?
Go ahead.
Mr. Kent?
Before he was shot, I think
Yeah, but when police are on scene, you know, they're shouting orders at him. Did he respond verbally in any way?
I'm sorry, you were saying Mr. Kent. You want to know Mr.
Right.
Kent?
I don't think he did. It means obviously you were saying in response to the commands before he was shot.
Yeah,
did he say anything? Right.
Make any statement?
Oh.
You know, there's a lot of, and one reason I ask is there's a lot of speculation about suicide by cop. And did he say anything that indicated
I wouldn't.
Indicated what he was trying to accomplish, or what he's doing, or he's not giving up, anything like that?
No.
I wouldn't say that he said anything that would indicate that.
No.
Did he say anything at all?
I don't recall anything that he said, no.
Melissa, approximately how far was Deputy Young from Mr. Kent when the deputy's shots were fired?
It would have to be an approximation. I don't know for sure, but between 50 and 80 feet.
And were those shots fired in automatic mode?
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Did any other responding officers fire any shots?
No.
Was anybody else in Mr. Kent's line of fire?
I believe that the reason why other deputies may not have discharged their firearms was because of the concern that there may have been patrons in the restaurant area. They weren't fully aware where the patrons or employees in the restaurant were. And so under their standing orders, they were not in a position where they could safely discharge their firearms.
And it's very clear from the evidence that Mr. Kent clearly presented a direct threat to Deputy Young.
Yes,
Yes.
and I would say in addition that throughout this very thorough investigation and interviewing of everyone who was there was never the slightest hint that would indicate that this was anything other than justified.
Can you go into the last time there was an officer involved shooting in Genesee County?
We can't.
I'd be relying on what I've heard in the media.
Okay.
No, I know.
Or the last time your office was involved?
Yeah,
in
I mean, a number of years ago in the city of Batavia, there was a case I handled. There was a police officer who discharged his weapon, and the suspect was not hit. It's been a long time, very long time, fortunately.
And Mr. Kent was pronounced deceased at the scene, correct?
Yes, correct.
Mr. Kent said he had issues with people before this. Did he go there intentionally to meet somebody he had an issue with, or did he meet her randomly at the restaurant?
There's no reason to believe that he did go there intentionally to meet anyone in particular.
So did he have his weapon on him when he was in the restaurant? Did he go back out to get his weapon? Or?
I don't think we really know the answer to that because in the midst of this incident, he did return to his truck and then come back out. So I don't think we have any way of knowing whether he had it on him all the time or got it from his truck when he went out there, because it was not discharged or displayed by him until after he'd gone back to his truck.
So you think maybe when he got kicked out, there would be a possibility?
I guess your guess is as good as ours on that.
There's no way to...
Right.
I had heard, and is it true that he made a statement that he's going out to get his gun?
I don't remember hearing
I don't
that.
recall hearing that at all.
So what alerted patrons to, but in the time that he left and came back, alerted them that they needed to seek cover?
They were looking out the window and they saw him point his gun up in the air and discharge his weapon
And
twice.
heard him firing his gun.
And heard it.
Yeah.
All right.
Anything else? Okay.
Did you utilize rather any surveillance footage from the log cabin restaurant? Did that exist, and was that helpful in the investigation?
There was no external surveillance video from the log cabin restaurant, so we don't have anything in that regard. There was interior, but it was more focused on employee areas of the bar, I would say. And so, again, I would say that the interior surveillance was limited in value.
And most of the people that were inside, heard they went down into the basement and freezer area? Is that what happened with all this was going on?
They went down into the basement area. I can't tell you if it was the freezer area, but they definitely were in the basement.
And he never re-entered once he went out and got his gun, correct?
No, he did.
He did, okay.
He did.
Well, you're unsure if that third shot was discharged inside or outside?
We have reason to believe it was outside, but I can't confirm that.